All right, Hotep.
Hotep, Hotep.
Put your hands together. We live. We around the world now. We represent the Institute around the world right now. Live from the Malefe 35 Germantown Avenue in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we are on the move with the right information. There's conscious people around the world. And your brothers and sisters in Philadelphia, on behalf of Malefe Kete Asante Institute, we greet you in peace and we say Hotep. Come, because some people's attention span, isn't what others are. So if it's your first time getting this kind of information, we want to keep the party going. The namesake of the Institute, the great Dr. Malefe Kete Asante, put your hands together, author of over 80 books, the chair of the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, and the first in the world to have a PhD in Africology and African American Studies. Show your love.
Wow, man. That brother's powerful. He's dynamite. I love him, and I love his spirit and his energy. And they told me already that earlier this morning that he just really turned the place out. I mean, that's him. Dr. Aaron Smith, delighted young brother with great power, with a great sense of understanding and sensitivity to our history and culture. I just want to thank all of you for coming. People have come as far away as Washington today. And I'm really happy to see you. And more people are coming, and that's good. Because the topic that we have to talk about tonight is a very important topic. And it's one that, to me, is at the center of a lot of the discourse that we have had in the world. And most people sometimes think that these kinds of discussions are not necessary. But these are the discussions that create the context and the situations that we find ourselves in. If we don't get this right in terms of our history and our culture, then everything else is out of alignment. And that's basically what we have seen throughout the world. So I'm happy. I'm honored, first of all, to be able to be here. I've just come from the continent of Africa. I can tell you that it is rich and powerful, and that the continent is beautiful, that our brothers and sisters on the continent, particularly the Nubian people in Upper Egypt, are doing as best as they can. They're teaching their children. They're learning, certainly, their ancient culture and history at home. I was very stunned, however, to find that one of my great friends, Brother Hamdi, in Elephantine, had passed away 2 years ago. And so I was fortunate to be able to go to his home and to meet his mother-in-law and also his son, Brother Abdul. So it was really nice. Brother Hamdi was my teacher in Elephantine about 25 years ago when I first started going to Kemet. I went looking for the black people. That's the thing I went looking for. I said, Cairo can't be all there is to ancient Kemet, because the people who live in Cairo were not in ancient Kemet. Most people get confused. They think those people were in ancient Kemet. They were not in ancient Kemet. They came to Africa in the 7th century. This era, not even 7th century BC, 7th century this side, you see. So when you understand that, then you can understand why it took so long for certain things to happen with our ancient culture in Kemet and in Nubia. Actually, it was like around the 19th century, the 1800s, that we began to get some interest in preservation of Nile Valley civilization, even though the Arabs had already been there since the 7th century. And they had no interest in that preservation. It was the Europeans who saw it and saw a way to try to capitalize on it and make Europe greater in the minds of the world by achieving the appropriation of African traditions and African culture and African history. So Europeans saw that in the 19th century. I mean, after Champollion, had succeeded in deciphering the ancient language. Then Europeans just poured into Egypt. They were not trained. There were no trained guys. Some of these guys were thieves.
That's right.
They were just looking for what they could sell. They wanted any fragment of Kemet. They could take it and sell it to a museum in Chicago or Berlin or Paris or something. They were thieves, and these thieves who came into Africa and into Egypt and the Nile Valley later became known as Egyptologists. They became the scholars. These thieves, the guys who were looking for as much as they could of the ancient African civilization. These were not scholars. They were not trained university people. Most of them were just adventurers. And these adventurers, some of them were administrators, political administrators, like Salt or Trevadi. I mean, these guys, they were just scavengers, in a sense, in terms of African history and culture. But they started in the 19th century trying to preserve as much as they could, or take as much as they could and take it to the museums. And the Arabs had been there, as I said, by that time for about 1,200 years. And they didn't have that interest, the same kind of interest in nothing to do with Islam and with their culture, and so why should black people be going to the Nile Valley looking at the temples and looking at the pyramids and so on? This is pagan and so forth. So you got those attitudes, and those attitudes are rampant, not just among Arab people, but among African people who have no knowledge of their own history and culture, who basically despise their ancestors, who basically can never understand the depth of the philosophy and the strength of the interpretations that our people gave to the world. So that's why I say to you that this topic, Ancient Nubia, a key to understanding African religion, is one of the topics that I've often wanted to discuss and to deal with, because I think it is key. If we can understand that, if we can appreciate that, we will understand what some key propositions are in the world, some key propositions about Europe. And one of them is that all European analysis, whatever the analysis is, of Nubia and Kemet, all of those analyses have been done under the veil of racism. Now you got to remember that, because if you don't know that, again, we're lost. Everything, whatever. Let me just tell you this, just a little bit. Before Champollion had succeeded in deciphering the ancient language of Kemet, the white people had all kinds of Europeans had all kinds of fanciful descriptions of what the ancient language said. And most of that fanciful language that they say, they would look at the so-called hieroglyphics. We don't like to use the word hieroglyphics, which means sacred carvings. It's a Greek word. We say Chicam, or the language of Kemet, or either we say Metanetia, which is the description, which means the divine words. But they looked at the Chicam, and when they looked at the Chicam, they just made up interpretations that benefited Europe. It's like what they were saying here is glory to the white man. So all kinds of crazy stuff. They just made it up. And when Champollion in 1822 finally came with to decipher the language, that's how we began to recover the language, because the language had been out of let's put it this way, it had been lost, so to speak, since the 6th century. And that's when the Christians closed down the last temple in Nubia. And they closed down the last temple in Nubia in around 575. And this was the temple of Pazurk, which is called in the Greek language Philae. They closed that down in 575. And then after that, nobody was supposed to speak the ancient Egyptian language anymore. You couldn't speak. And it was preserved by a small group of people called Coptic Christians. They preserved a little bit of it, and it's sort of like an ancient dialect of it, but it's not the full Chicam. So, but the point that I'm making here about this is that to understand what has been written about ancient Nubia, you got to understand it in the light that the Europeans were always trying to discover Europe in Africa. This is why they even claim that ancient Egyptians were not Africans. Then they claimed that the Nubians, they were claiming the Nubians were not Africans. Then they claimed that the Ethiopians are not Africans. So then you start looking around, well, where are the Africans? We're in Africa. This is the continent of Africa. The Nile River runs through only one continent in the world. It doesn't run through Europe. The Nile River runs through the continent of Africa. 4,100 miles through the continent of Africa. Never touches Europe, never touches Asia, never touches South America. And some of you Americans may think it touches North America, but it doesn't. Nile River is an African river. So this notion somehow that you can find Europe in Nubia or Europe in Kemet was a notion that came out of racism, because they could not figure out how was it possible that the people they had colonized, that they had oppressed, that they had enslaved, that these people could build the civilizations of the Nile Valley. So remember that. Everything you read about Egypt or about Nubia that's written by Europeans, particularly in the 19th and 20th century, you to be wise and to not be fooled, you better ask yourself the question, where is the racism in this? That's the question you gotta ask. If you don't ask that question, you will definitely be fooled. All right. Now the second proposition is most Europeans have tried to find the European entry into Nubia. So they said, okay, well, if the Nubians were not Europeans, then actually Nubia itself is just a corridor into Africa. It's not Africa, it's the corridor into Africa. Wait a minute. That's just like saying California is not United States. California is just a corridor, in North America. This is a stupid kind of thinking. Nubia is Africa. Nubia is a part of Africa. It's not a part of anywhere else. It is not. But Europe had to do that because they were trying to claim at one point that Egypt was Europe. You see? So now, if Egypt is Europe, then Nubia has to be a corridor to Africa, because Africa was something else in their mind. We don't even know what they meant when they were saying Africa was something else in their mind. It's a very strange thing what Europe tried to do, because there's no one way that Africans look. There's no one type of African people. Africa is the most diverse continent on the face of the earth. There are 3,000 languages spoken on the continent of Africa. This is almost half of all the languages spoken in the world. Africa is diverse. There are all kinds of people. Look all kinds of ways in Africa. There's no one way that African people look. I mean, you can't make no argument like that. Like somehow this is not Africa, but there's a corridor to Africa. You can go to the tip of South Africa and you can find the Khoi people. And the Khoisan people are about the same complexion as the people of Morocco. So you can't even go by color. You can't go by hair. You can't, none of that. You can't even go by nose. You can't go by Africa. Come on. You can just look at this room and see the diversity of African people. We're diverse people. We are, in a sense, the quintessential human beings, in the sense that we have all types of people, all types of looks, all types of hair and complexion and eye color among African people. That's the African people. So the continent of Africa has given birth to all of this. So that's the second proposition. The third proposition is that Nubia, Ethiopia, and some people have argued that you can put those two together. There's another argument. We can talk about that later. That Nubia, Ethiopia, really is the mother of Kemet. Because we like to talk about Kemet. I love Kemet. I was just talking to Dr. Maulana Karenga yesterday, and I was telling him about following the Chicago correspondence course on Metanetcha, on Chicam. And we were just talking about it, and I was saying, we like to talk about Kemet because we have more evidence. Kemet left so many records. That's why we know so much about it. And so we say, we start with Kemet, and we also start with it because writing starts with Kemet. The first writing in the world is the writing that the African people in Kemet did. Writing even in Mesopotamia doesn't come to 500 to 800 years later. Then writing comes in Africa. This is the first writing. And not only writing as we know it, but if you take even the scripts and you take symbols, the writing on the caves, the cave writing. Africa has hundreds of thousands of cave paintings and cave writings. I've seen many of them. Zimbabwe, for example, you can go all over the country and just go to these caves, one cave after the other, and saw where human beings, African human beings, had put symbols of animals and people and birds on caves. This is all over. So Africans have been doing this for thousands of years, even before what we call history. You remember, history, they say, starts with writing. Before writing, they call it prehistory. This is one of the conventions that Europe made. So if you don't have writing, then it's prehistory. If you have writing, it's history. So when you look at history, then Kemet looms large because there's a lot of writing about Kemet, a lot of information about Kemet. And in fact, we have more information about Kemet than we have about Nubia. But yet, let me tell you something, Nubia has yet to be discovered fully. And not only that, but the attempt on Nubia is to destroy all evidences of African civilization. And that's been going on longer than we can even imagine. The whole idea, because let me just tell y'all something. You know that most of y'all here at the MKA Institute, y'all know this, but a lot of people in the world don't know. There are more temples, pyramid type temples, in Nubia than in Egypt, in Kemet. Did y'all know that? Oh, of course, y'all know. Y'all here at the Institute. Y'all hear Dr. Aaron all the time. Okay, so it's important to know this, because otherwise you get a wrong impression of what African history is. That in what is today Sudan, and remember, these boundaries that we have now, this is fake news. These are fake boundaries. Who set the boundaries? Right here at Abu Simbel, just a few miles south of Abu Simbel. Then we're gonna say this is no longer this is Sudan, that's Egypt, and all that kind of thing. That's 4,000 years ago. Our people set those no. These are modern borders. These are more, you can't even go by that. You can't even say, like we say, we say, well, Nubia is now a part of Sudan and a part of Egypt. States of America in the 8th grade, where is Egypt and where is Sudan? They say, well, they think it's in Europe. They even think Nubia is in Europe because they think of the civilization, you see, and so forth. And that's why they think of it. But brothers and sisters, let me tell you something that they discovered in Sudan, in the Nubian area at Cusco, an incense burner. An incense burner. Now, this incense burner is like almost 5,000 years old. It's like somewhere you burn, you put a piece of incense in and you burn it and now you have stick incense. But they used to just have, the little stone incense and they burn. This incense burner was discovered to be found 3,200 years before Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ wasn't even thought about. Nobody was thinking about him. Nobody was thinking about Muhammad. 3,200 years BC in Nubia, they have at Cusco an incense burner. Now let me tell you what's on the incense burner. There's a picture of a cat. There's a picture of an antelope. There's a picture of a ruler like a king. The king is wearing a white crown, the white crown of Nubia and Upper Egypt. And then there's a prisoner, and then there's a facade of a palace.
You said he's kneeling though?
Kneeling.
Like Kaepernick?
Yes, kneeling. Just like Kaepernick. You see what I'm saying? I'm getting to be hip hop. I'm hanging around the hip hop man, right? You can put all that stuff together. I mean, it's a very fascinating thing. But the facade, the palace facade, is so key because they carved a palace facade of a king's palace, and that had never been done in history. Nobody had ever seen that. Neither in Africa or Asia or Europe, nowhere. The first palace facade that was ever carved on anything was when the Africans carved the palace facade of a royal member of a family on the Cusco incense burner. That's the first thing. Now, let me tell you something else. I don't want to get into this too deeply, but that's a general map of Sudan. You can't quite see that so much, but if you look at the first part, the top part, it looks like it's white, all that area in there. Well, this was the area of Nubia. But you know what they do in the map of Sudan? They say this is the area of the Arabs and the Nubians. Because what happened was that when the conquest happened, they took over that northern part of Sudan, for the most part administratively, and basically marginalized the original people. The original people of that land were the Nubian people. And not only did they marginalize the Nubian people, but over the centuries, they have done many, many things. Because one of the last Christian kingdoms in northern Africa was in Nubia. And this is Nobatia and Dongola. I mean, these were it was even 16 or 1700s before the Muslims finally destroyed that whole part of Nubia. And then they took over that part and then claimed that there are no Nubians here. There are no black people here. There never were any black people here. In fact, if you go right now and you go to that northern part of Sudan, one of the things in the southern part of Egypt, it's the same thing. One of the things they try to do is get rid of the black people. And you know what brother told me just recently in Elephantine? He said, we ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere. They want to get rid of us. We ain't going nowhere. We're going to be here. We're ready. This is where our ancestors were born, where they live, where they work. We are not going anywhere. Because you know what happened in southern Egypt and in northern Sudan was that in the 1960s and 70s, they had a vast removal of African people. They removed the people, and when they built the Aswan High Dam in around 1970, what that dam did was to flood a huge part of the antiquities of Nubia. We don't even know, and you know what's so shameful in a way, but I can understand it. I mean, I try to explain it. You know, for us as African people, we don't even know what we lost. We didn't even know we were losing.
That's right.
That in effect, what they did was to destroy African villages and monuments and temples and shrines and bury them under Lake Nasser.
In the water.
That's what they did.
Culture bandits.
This is, what else can they be but cultural bandits? So the African, so we have a problem even in interpreting Nubia, because so much of Nubia has been lost. And yet what was not lost is still in Sudan, but the Sudanese government doesn't seem to know how to preserve it.
Yeah.
You can go to preserve for tourism. It's good for tourism. We go down and see, and you know, you go, as we just, with 24 people, we just came back. Dr. Gaffin and I, we did 24 people. Went with us. Go into the temples, down in the tombs, see all the paintings on the black people on the walls, and listen to the white people say, I wonder why Tut's black. He said, because he was. You know what I mean? Why you wonder, you know? It's all kinds of crazy stuff. You go into the museum, Cairo even, and you see all the hair, the wigs, the afros. And where these afros come from? Because this is the people's hair. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so we got a big problem, and this problem is amazing because look at the acres of pyramids that you would find in Nubia right today. The acres of pyramids. These the pyramids, granted, in Kemet are older, you know, but they're not as many. There are over 200 pyramids in Sudan. And these 200 pyramids, I'm telling you, that very few of them are under full reconstruction, like the ones in Egypt have been under for years. The different governments of Germany and France and United States universities like Chicago and these universities going in and say, we're going to restore this. There is also the ASA restoration project that Tony Browder is working with the Russian scholar Pistakova. They're working to actually restore the tomb of Karakorum. So that's going on. We went there. We saw that work going on. So that's the only example that I know, and there may be others. There was a brother who went with us from South Africa, Dr. Sisanti, and he couldn't think of any others, but I couldn't think of any other black group that is working in, say, in southern Egypt doing archaeology. The only one I know of is this one that is really a joint project between this Russian woman, Elena Pistakova, and Anthony Browder. That's the only one I know. So it's very fascinating how the story of Africa is being positioned and how it's being told. because it's not being told from an Afrocentric point of view. It's rare. And so that's why we have to do it. So Shake Out the Joke. In 1980, he's reading one of my books. And this is a little book I gave to him. And went by to see him at his office in Dakar. And I just put his picture here because he's important. He's dead now. He died in 86. But he was one of our great scholars, and he was the one who pointed us to the Nile Valley civilization, because his argument was that civilization in the world starts with the Nile Valley. Nowhere else. This is fundamental. All right. So Nubia, from Aswan to Meroe. Most people have never heard of Jebel Barkal. And in fact, that's not its ancient African name. That's the name that we get from the Arabic, Jebel Barkal, meaning holy mountain, which overlooks the ancient city of Napata, which was a great city from which the conquering dynasty, 25th dynasty, that actually conquered the Nile Valley from Nubia all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. This was one of their main cities, the city of Napata. But Jebel Barkal is one of the great religious sites in the world. It is larger than any other site that I can think of except Karnak, the temple at Karnak. It is basically, some people used to call it the southern Ipet Sut. Ipet Sut was the ancient name of that great temple in Karnak, and what it's called, we call it now Karnak. That's the Arab term, but the Africans call it Ipet Sut. Ipet Sut, the great holy site in Waset, which today is called, they change the names on you, confusion. What's the name of Waset today? Anybody? Luxor. Luxor. See, they changed it to Luxor. The Arabs changed it to Luxor, but the Greeks had another name for it. Thebes. So you got the African name of the city was Waset. The Greeks, when they ruled, they changed it to Thebes, and the Arabs, when they came to power, called it Luxor. But the ancient Africans in Waset called the temple Ipet Sut. And so this sacred of sacreds, this sacred place, had, in a sense, a twin, which was in the south, called, which we call now Jebel Barkal. And both of these temples, these were major temples, you see. So Thutmose III, the great conquering king, the greatest conqueror in the history of the world. No conqueror, and remember this, African people start thinking and reading and writing and learning and understanding the world. No conqueror in the world was as great as Thutmose III. Thutmose III, 17 military campaigns that he led personally into battle and came back alive. No other king ever did that. Closest we get is Alexander the Greek, who did 7. 17 times, Thutmose III. So in 1450, He's in Nubia, and he links Jebel Barkal to Waset, to these Napata and also Waset. These are the great cities of the kingdom. And there's a book by Miriam Maat Kare Munghes. She was the first African American that I know of who ever wrote a book about Kush itself, Nubia itself. And her book is called Kush, the Jewel of Nubia. And this book was based on her dissertation. She was the first black American that I know of to take this on. She said, we've got to reclaim Kush. We've reclaimed Kemet, but we've got to reclaim Kush. So if you get a chance, that book is still on Amazon.com. Kush, the Jewel of Nubia. Now, other map, I just want to show you this little map quickly of Sudan so that you can see you can see at the bottom here, you can see actually Abu Simbel. You can see Abu Simbel at the bottom of Egypt, and then you can see Wadi Halfa, and then you can see also that Lake Nasser, which is I think the Lake Nubia in Sudan. If I'm wrong, I think I got some Sudanese in the audience who could correct me, but I think it's called Lake Nubia. But I know it's Lake Nasser in Egypt, right? And Nasser was the leader of Egypt that built the high dam that caused this, but it flooded lots of things. Now, where I'm getting to in a minute, you will see where we have the key to understanding African religion, but I just wanted you to remember, just look at this map and see the northern part there, and you can see the larger part coming from Egypt into Sudan, where you have, it looks like the river gets larger. It's a massive lake. One of the largest lakes, maybe the largest man-made lake in the world, is that lake, Lake Nasser, Lake Nubia, okay? It's more than 250 miles long, it's massive, and it destroyed so much of Nubian civilization. Okay, now, we say that it's possible that the oldest monument ever made by human beings was Heru Im Akhet. This is called Har Im Akhet by some people, meaning Horus or Heru, Horus, Horus of the horizon. This was the Sphinx. The Greeks call it Sphinx. That was not an African word. We call it Heru Im Akhet. Now, Heru Im Akhet is a face of an African man with the body of a lion. And some people think it was built in the Old Kingdom, maybe in 26, 25 BC. But there are other people who think that it was built maybe even longer than that, 14,000 years old. And I just give that to you as an example. There's some things I'm giving as examples so you can understand. 4 Nubian temples, Sphinx is not in Nubia. Sphinx is in Kemet. But 4 Nubian temples were given to Europe by the Egyptian government in the 1960s and 70s. And look at this now. You probably never heard of some of these temples. The Temple of Tafa was given to the Netherlands, and it's in Leiden right now. If you're in Leiden and you're listening to me, you can go to the museum and you can see it. The Temple of Lissa was given to Italy, and it's in Turin. You can go and see it, and it was built by Tutmosis III. The Temple of Dabu was given to Spain, and the Royal Palace of Madrid. That's where it's now. These are just a few of them. And then the Gates of Kalopsha was given to the Berlin Museum, and then in New York City, right now, brothers and sisters, those of you in Harlem and Brooklyn and Manhattan, you know, other parts of New York, you can go right now and see the Temple of Dendur. That's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was given by Egypt to New York City and America. Did you think they asked the Nubians? The Arab government of Egypt asked the Nubians, you want us to give your temples away?
Wasn't there?
What you want us to give? I mean, what do you want us to do with this? They never had a thought. They never thought about it. There was nothing ever in the mind of the government that really went and asked the people of Nubia about this. In fact, what they did was they moved the Nubian people. They moved them, literally. Some people they moved 800 miles away from where they were. They moved them to the desert. So you remember this. Y'all got to remember this. The Nubians are not desert people. For the most part, the Nubians are river people. They lived along the Nile. That's their civilization. The Nile civilization. That's the Nubian. And so what did the government do? They moved them to the desert. That's not only cruel, That just shows you how little they understand about our history and culture, you see. So I'm telling you about these temples because I want you to look. Temple of Dabu. Not in, they moved it. Go right there. Look at this. The ancient names of God. Now let's go back to the ancient names of God. We know that Ra was used in Aunu. Aunu. Remember that name, Aunu. Sometimes people just call it On, O-N. Because when you're looking at the script, the name of the city, you can make On, you can make Aunu out of it. But what the Greeks did, they made Heliopolis out of it. they just call it Heliopolis. They say, this Aunu, we don't want to say that. Let's just say Heliopolis. Because Ra was the god that was like the sun, was as massive and comprehensive as the sun. So they said, Ra, since Ra is a sun god, this is the city of Heliopolis, city of the sun. But the Africans call it Aunu. All right? That's the city where Ra. That's the city of Ra. Amen was the god, the deity for Waset, which was one of the greatest cities ever in the history of the world. And Ptah was the name of the deity for Menefer. Menefer used to be called by the Greeks Memphis. That's where you get Memphis, Tennessee from. You know, if the white people knew that the word Memphis, Tennessee came from Africa, them white people down there near Mississippi and Memphis, they would be shocked. That their name, Memphis, is actually come from an African word. Menefer. You see? That's where it came. And the Greeks just took the African word and changed it to say Memphis. You see? That's what they did. A lot of the names of African names, they changed like that. And then the deity Atun and sometimes Mandulis were worshipped at Jebel Barkal. All right, next slide here. Now, I'm just going to mention this. The name Amen is probably one of the oldest names for God anywhere. This is why I tell people, they say amen at the end of Christian prayers, Hebrew prayers, Muslim prayers. They say amen. Amen, amen, amun, whatever. They just say it, right? Because it's an ancient name for God. It's an African name. It's an ancient African name for God. Amen. That's what it is. And so everybody want to make sure they have insurance. So that's why at the end of their prayers, they say it. Y'all said, I know, y'all just said it today. Amen, amen, right? That's right. Oh, you make sure I name the African God, because if I don't, I may be in trouble. You see? Amen. So amen. This is an ancient name. And then there was a name for some of the queens of Nubia, like Amanarensis. You know, amen. And it comes from that. Amanishaketi. You see, Amun Ra. The word even in Kiswahili, Imani. Hey, it comes from God. Amen. It's the same name, same root, you see. So when we understand that, we understand a lot about ourselves. But the temples of Nubia, I'm just go through this quickly. Philae was a temple, and I was just there last week. This was a temple where the deity Oset was worshipped, Oset, and also Heru, her son, Horus, as the Greeks said. Then Kalapsha, which is also the Nubian, these are Nubian temples, where Heru was worshipped. And then Abu Simbel, where Amun-Ra, Ptah, Atum, and Ramses himself were worshipped as gods. And then Dendur, the one that's in New York City, where Oset, that the Greeks call Isis, was worshipped. And Padesi and Pihor, who were the sons of the local Nubian king. They were worshiping Osa and Oset. Then the temple of Solab. Let me just see if I can you on the side of another temple. Can you move that down? Okay, we can move that. There's a temple. Yeah, it is. This one. Can you hit that one? Yeah. Okay. This is I think we pronounce that Solab. Solab. This is the temple of Solab. This brother right back there was born not far from there. Brother, raise your hand, Brother Nubia too. Brother Nubia too. That's where his people. That's his old history, culture. He was born a few miles from there, right? So this is, but I give you this because it's a real thing. This whole notion of Nubia and the history and culture of Nubia is so rich. And yet that temple at Solab is not as protected as it ought to be. Somebody just wrote last month that they just drove there, got out of the car, walked right up there and picked up rocks and stones. You know, like, wait a minute. You can't do that anywhere in Egypt, in any monument. But in Sudan you can, because they don't give a damn about it. It's not their culture, the ones who rule the country. It's the culture of the people who live there. But they don't have the power, and they don't have the international reach to demand that people respect their history and their culture. No other people in the world have allowed their culture to be so diminished as we African people. It's a very, very tragic thing. Then there's the Temple of Tafar. That's what it looks like in the Netherlands, you see. And here's the key ideas behind the religion. Key ideas: Ma'at, Isfat, Ma'karu, Neb-Ankh, and Ankh-Nehe. And I'll tell you quickly what this is. Ma'at simply is order, balance, harmony. And out of that you get truth, righteousness, justice, and reciprocity. That's the basic idea of ancient Nubian religion. And the basic of the Kemet. This is the basic idea. It's the same. That's why it's a continuum. You know, people do some silly stuff. And I just had to correct a guide over in Kemet the other day about this, because they do this. They see a image on the wall of a temple, for example, with Ramses defeating his enemies. And some of the enemies look like black people, and some of them look like Syrians. And they make a distinction and say, well, you know, the ancient Egyptians, they were these Nubians were not the same as the Egyptians, when in fact they were the same people. It's just like, okay, the French and the Germans could be in a battle, but you don't say that they're different races. They're just different nations. The Nubians were a different nation than Kemet, but it was not like somehow these are different people and we got to defeat them. No. They're the same people. The Germans took over France and Paris during World War II. Nobody said that they were a different race. They were a different nation. And they had a military strategy and so forth. So when we look at that, we have to always, that's why I tell you, if you look at it through racist eyes, like the Europeans who first wrote about it, that's what they said. Oh, well, these people were Africans and the Egyptians didn't like them because they were black. Well, the Egyptians were black themselves. That's a stupid kind of statement. You know, the Germans took over the French. They didn't like them because, you know, the Germans were white and the French were not. I mean, no, that's stupid. But that's the kind of reasoning racism gives you. And Europe is good at that, because Europe always wants to establish the notion of European exclusivity and European uniqueness, you see. But when they discover the Nile Valley civilizations, which are greater than civilization of Rome and Greece combined, they don't know what to do with it. Where do you place this kind of civilization? Where do you place 200 pyramids? How you put that in civilization and not be in Europe? They don't know how to figure that. Where you put the 106 pyramids in Kemet in Egypt? How you put that? If these things are greater, more ancient, more powerful, more majestic than anything in Greece and Rome, how do you explain it? That's the problem of racism, you see. And so Isfet is evil, and then disorder. Makaru is a word for justified. Even in the Bible, people use the word to be justified. This comes from ancient Africa. True of voice is what it means. Makaru, true of voice. And it was written on the temples, on the tombs, that such and such a person was true of voice, was Makaru, was justified, was aligned with truth. That's justification. That's to be justified. And then Neb-Ankh. Neb-Ankh was the so-called, the Greeks call it sarcophagus, was the stone tomb. The Africans call it Neb-Ankh, the Lord of Life. The Greeks call it sarcophagus, meaning flesh eater. Isn't that crazy? You go down into these tombs, and the guide, who was confused because the guide is following European pattern, says, well, this sarcophagus. And I said, wait a minute, sir. Sarcophagus means flesh eater. That's not what the words say right there. They say Neb-Ankh, Lord of Life. So why don't we call it what they call it? Oh, that's right. That's right. Sarcophagus is not an African word. You see? And then the same is true with Ankh-Nehe. Life forever. Ankh is a word means life. Ankh-Nehe. The Africans were always looking for eternal life. This was before Islam, before Christianity, before Buddhism. The Africans said eternal life. And that's why they buried their dead like they did. Because they knew, they felt, they believed in this notion of eternal life. All right? The gates of Kalasha. This is right outside Aswan. You can move on. This is the temple, the same temple. This is Nubian temple. These are my Nubian brothers, right? So you got Nubian people still in Kemet. These I met about 10 years ago, but there are others still there. Young man I just met. I met him 25 years ago, but I just met him again last week. Still there. Nubian people fighting and struggling for Nubian civilization. They won't even allow them to speak their language. They can teach it to their children. They can speak it at home, but in the streets and places you have to speak Arabic. Now they guess their language. They don't have. So one of the things that we've decided to do at Temple, and he's fight with me, this brother right here. Get you in trouble. No, I'm not going to get him in trouble. No, man, I'm not going to get him in trouble. He's
We're all in trouble.
We're not in trouble. But one of the things we do, we're going to have this brother right here, brother Nubintu. Stand up a little bit right here. This brother Nubintu, this brother is a scholar in the Nubian language. We're going to have him teaching at Temple the Nubian language. Thank you, brother. So y'all can, January, y'all can sign up for his class. Nubian, the first time in a university that Nubian is being taught like this. We're going to do it because we have to. It's essential. If you learn even the contemporary Nubian, it will help you gain some access into ancient Nubian.
So you're going to teach in Passat?
No, he's teaching in Temple. Yes, in African American Studies. That's right. So look out for it. Introduction to Nubian, right? Because we already teach ancient Egypt. I wrote this course maybe in 1993 or 4 a course on ancient Egyptian language, Middle Egyptian. We teach Middle Egyptian. We teach that. We've been teaching that for years. And the last person to teach it was Dr. Ney, who said, I'll probably teach it next year. But we teach that because it's essential that we know our classical languages. Because once you know the classical languages, it makes it easier for you to know a lot of other African languages. It's just like, you know how the Europeans learn Latin and they learn Greek? They learn those two languages because those languages give you insight into other European languages. You can know something by knowing what the classical languages were. And what those, you can even make out certain words by knowing what the Latin was or what the Greek was, you see. So, okay, now this is again, just to show you, this is the Temple of Dendur, all right? The oldest evidence of religion in Nubia goes back beyond 6,000 BC, all right? And we don't need to get into it, but all the funerary traditions and so on. The whole notion of Atum with water and the mound creates and establishes Shu and Tef Nut, Geb and Nut, all Set and all Sa. Nebhet and Set. That's all there. I just want to show you this, brother, just for a quick minute, because as I was writing this and getting my notes together, I got word that this great brother passed away. He was my good friend. He's been in Philadelphia. His daughter finished Temple and Villanova Law School. His name was Atukwe Okai. Atukwe Okai was the mayor of the city of Accra in Ghana at one time. But beyond that, he was one of the poets, one of the great poets. He's the national poet of Ghana, and most people call him the greatest poet, African poet. And Tukwa Akai introduced me to Winnie Mandela. He also was a gentleman who was sent to school in Moscow by Kwame Nkrumah, and became a very great poet, one of the greatest I've ever known. So I just wanted to dedicate this to him, and we're going to finish here. Jebel Barkal, the holy mountain, and I told you beyond that was the city of Napata. Let's go to the next one. Ancient Nubians invented the representation of deities in animal and human forms. This was even before in Kemet. The Nubians did this, all right? And this is some of the pyramids. You can go, you can see this, you see? And the next, we talked about Mat, Amen in Kush, the Temple of Defufa in Kerma, 1600 BC. And here, Amen, again, the ram-headed creator God is worshipped, all right? Go to the next. The principles of Nubian life. Not faith, it's not a faith tradition, but a life tradition. This is different. You see? It's not, because people say, well, what faith did they believe in? Wait a minute. No. It's what did they do? What was a life? What did they live every day? Somebody asked me this on the trip. You know, African Americans said, Dr. Simon, what's your religion? I said, my religion is African. They said, well, what faith is that? I said, it's African. Religion is the way you live, your life. I live like an African. I'm generous like an African. I laugh like an African. I have humor like an African. I dance like an African. I'm an African. I eat African food when I can. No, you know what I mean? It's just, and I'm happy. There's a sense that people try to separate their religion from their life. But your life tells me who you are, how you are, you see. So it's not doctrine, but rituals, ceremonies, culture. That's the key. Not simply about males, but female presence. This is why Nubia had 42 queens. No nation in the history of the earth has ever had as many queens as Nubia. Do you know? For over 42 women ruled. Not just a husband of their, or rather the wife of their husband. They ruled. Now, you can't do that now in Sudan. You won't find women in those positions almost nowhere in the world. But that's the way it was in ancient Nubia. Because Africans understood the principle of male and female. They were clear in that. People didn't have hang-ups. They didn't feel like they had to suppress the woman. They didn't have, that was not there, you see. Many of those temples in Nubia were built for queens, you see. All right? Respect for ecology. That's why they had the totem idea. Certain things you can't eat. Because if you ate them all, then you destroy everything. You can't eat them. And you got to have respect for age groups and the age. And in the end of your life, your heart must be lighter than a feather. Your heart should be light than a feather. It didn't say, and what I always like to tell people this, it didn't say you have to be perfect. Say your heart had to be lighter than a feather. Your good must outweigh your evil. That's reasonable to me. That's why I try to be good every day, you know. But I'm not perfect, you know. And that was a fundamental difference, you see. That's the key to this. So Ma Karu, be true of voice, words are right, be justified. All right? And then I give you two pictures. One at Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel. This is the Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel, go back to Abu Simbel, please. Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel is this temple that Ramses II, Usamad Ra. We always do a ritual when we go there. We did it last week. And we go Usamad Ra. Ra. Satepim Ra. We give Usamad Ra Satepim Ra. This is the Heru name for Ramses. You see? And we said I always call on him. It always shocked to the other people, like, 'cause you don't have other tourists around. And I say, Ramses! Ramses! Usamad Ra Satepim Ra. And all the Australian stuff. What are them black people doing? So we talked to Ramses. We are your children. Here we are. We're back. They thought we would never come, but here we are. And he built the first temple for a woman ever built in the history of the world. Was a temple that Ramses built for his Nubian wife, Nefertari. This is before the Taj Mahal. Don't tell me about the Taj Mahal. I've seen the Taj Mahal. But the Taj Mahal was nothing like this. And it came far later. Remember, this is like 1400 BC. Or 1300 BC. 1300 BC. Taj Mahal wasn't built in the BCs. You see? It was built this era. So here's the first temple ever built by a man for a woman, and it's a black man building the temple for a black woman. Never, ever, and nowhere else in history. Earlier than this. That's the respect he had for Nefertari. Meaning the most beautiful among them all. So it's an incredible story. And then the last slide here is just an image of a parah, a sphinx head of a parah with the name's headdress on. And this is all Nubian. I give you this. There's so much more about this great civilization, and we're going to be digging and studying more. And I just want to say, in my best way. Unity is always our aim. And victory is our destiny. Thank you. Usher.
You can do better than that. Put your hands together. Malefe Kete Asante. All right. We got time for some question and answer? Just to facilitate properly, it's called question and answer. Your role is to give the question, not the soliloquy, not the dissertation. And although I know we've all been through something, not even your testimony, if you can just keep it brief for the benefit of everybody, it'd be much appreciated. Question and answer time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Doc.
When they moved the temples from Nubia to York and wherever else, was it stone by stone, or did the whole thing? Or how?
They took it, for example, the Temple of Dendur in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. It took them about 3 years to take it piece by piece, block stone by stone. Wow. And they what they do would put a number on the stone, and then when they reassembled it when they brought it to New York. And they did most of them like that, but there are still smaller temples and shrines that are under the lake, that they were not able to save them all. And look at this, and really the big outcry to save them when they said they were going to build an Aswan High Dam was from Europe. It was not even from the African governments, because of course, remember in 1970, many of them were not free and independent, and then the Nubian people didn't have much political power, so the Arab government of Egypt and Sudan could do basically whatever they will. And what they basically did was, let's say, wipe out the Nubian culture. And they did manage to save some, because the UNESCO and other people said, wait a minute, you can't do this. You're wiping out a whole civilization. Are y'all crazy? What is going on? And so they recovered a lot. And there is a Nubian museum in the city of Aswan. You can go see that. The Egyptian government just cut the funding on that recently, though. But it is still very, very powerful. And the second place, by the way, for Nubian artifacts is in Boston. You go to the Boston Museum. They have the largest collection of Nubian art outside of Egypt. I mean, in Sudan. Yes, sir.
I have a problem with the word sub-Saharan. Can you tell me exactly?
Yeah, did I use that word?
No. I didn't hear, no.
I never use that word. I agree with you. Yeah, you never use the word sub-Saharan. That don't make any sense anyway. There's no Africa south of the Sahara. The Sahara is Africa. I mean, what is that talking about? I have never understood that. And not only, as I told people, Africans live in the Sahara in many places. And I just saw Africans last week riding camels and racing camels. So Africans cross the desert on camels. So there's no such thing as sub-Saharan. That word was created again by, that's what I told you about. You have to look at racism. Every interpretation is race. The Europeans are very slick. There's no such thing as sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, basically, all of Africa is Africa. I mean, that's crazy. It's like saying there's a Europe that is you could say it's south of the Alps or something like that, but when you look at it, it's all Europe. I mean, it's all, the desert is Africa. So you're right. Don't use the word sub-Saharan Africa. Just use Africa. If you want to name a country, name it Chad or Niger or Morocco, Algeria, name a country. But they're trying to separate the Nile Valley civilizations away from the rest of the continent, which is also stupid. But anyway, yes, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got into a debate the other day with some Negroes.
Yeah.
I was telling them that Europe is not a continent.
Right.
And I opened up the map and I showed them it's on the continent of Asia.
Yeah.
And they couldn't see it. And it's, maybe the level of brainwashing has gone up another notch. And that other thing you had mentioned about Ammon, it's in the Bible in Revelation 3:13.
Yeah.
And Ammon is clearly a noun.
Yeah.
They tell you you're saying amen, which means so be it.
Right.
But Amen is clearly a noun in Revelation.
It sure is.
13.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember reading that. And you're perfectly correct about Europe. I mean, Europe is a created designation, and it is it's not normally. If you look up definition of continent, it is almost it's surrounded by water. But so you say Australia is a continent. I mean. North America, South America. I mean, some of them, it get fuzz a little bit. I mean, Africa. But when you get to Europe, you're really talking about, you could say Eurasia, if you make that a continent. But Europe wanted to separate itself from Asia, you see, and be something unique. They always like to do that. That's Europe, as I call it, the Donald Trump syndrome. It's like, we different, and so. We're not like other humans, and that's correct in terms of the way they have treated the world.
That's right.
But this is a very strange thing. So don't be surprised that they make a defense of Europe. What they're making a defense of mainly is Christianity, and this came out with the Battle of Poitiers. The Battle of Poitiers, and when Charles Martel sort of rallied the European ethnic groups together to fight against the Moors. And that's when they sort of came with an identity that they were different from the rest of the people on the Eurasian continent. I'm sorry, there was another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I used to listen to Dr. Ben, and that deals with the African, and he said that in one lecture that the oldest deity that was worshipped was not male nor a god, but a female.
I'm trying to think of he didn't give the name of the deity.
Well,
here's what I could say. I could say this, that in Africa, most of the concepts of deity do not have a masculine or feminine aspects to him. So he's probably correct in that sense. But I thought that maybe there was a name that he had. I mean, because it's really about energy. It's basically about energy. But there are some elements that demonstrate masculinity and some that demonstrate femininity. You can see that in some senses. You see, particularly when you hear the notion of the creation, where the creation was created by semen, for example, which is in a male sense. But for the most part, not just in ancient Kemet, but throughout the continent of Africa, this notion of he and she does not appear in the same way as it does in Western languages. Yes, please.
Could you correct me if I'm wrong, please? On the Memphite stone, the story of creation is 5,000 BC, and I know these are not the conventional titles of Isis and Osiris and Horus. I always tell my students that was the story where the Christ story was taken from.
Well, I think the Christ story, it just seems to me logical that it was taken from the ancient creation story of Kemet. I mean, I'm not sure, I can't point to where it went over into that, but there's so many things that are similar that you have to say that the ancient story was older. I don't know about the 5,000 year story for the Memphite stone theology, but it's probably older than that. But in terms of historical record, it has to start around 3,400 BC, because that's when writing starts. Otherwise, we don't know. We can say it must have been older than when writing started, but we don't know anything older than what is written. That's the point. But certainly when you see the story of the Madonna and the child, it sounds very much like Osset and Heru, or Horus. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you remember, but a few years back in Mali, there was a situation again with Islamic people. I think they were burning and pillaging libraries
Yes.
in Timbuktu, and I wanted to ask you, how can we, in terms of this conversation, preserving our history, we're seeing that it's wiped out, how can we try to leverage, you know, keeping this information that we have, like in Timbuktu, all of these libraries, the Islamic groups were just going through and with no repercussion at all. I don't even know what happened to all of these books and all of this information that we've lost. How can we try to leverage? It seems like the European, and again, there could be some racial undertones in their agenda behind that. We don't know. Taking these temples and bringing them to Europe, for example. In the preservation of that, there may be other things going on, but is that something we need to consider? Because in a lot of Africa, you have Arabs that are in charge of the governments who don't care about this information, and in fact, have a concerted effort possibly to erase this because it doesn't align with the religious teachings that they practice. So what can we do to help?
You've raised a very important question, and it is a significant question because after all, I mean, the whole meaning in Nigeria of Boko Haram is against any kind of knowledge and preservation of knowledge. Only knowledge is the Quran. So that's a very scary notion when it comes to our history, and that's why, world history. Yeah, but when you think of, I'm always sort of start with Africa because I'm worried. In Mali, you start with Mali is a good example. I had a student from Mali who was regretting the fact that in Mali almost no material culture exists. You see, because basically Islam wipes out all your culture. Because these are images, these stone sculptures, and many of the big African art dealers are from Muslim nations in Africa. And that's because they don't care about them as part of their ancestors. There's not an ancestral heritage. They don't necessarily, I mean, I used to be engaged in purchasing African art many years ago, and my dealer was from Guinea, and he was Muslim, and it was business for him. It had nothing to do with what I'm buying because I want to, the things you see even in here on the wall, these are some valuable things that they were purchased from people sometimes who didn't really care because they just was given away. So here's what we can do. We can honor our ancestors and our traditions, and we can write about the things that we see and know. We have to write. If we don't preserve them even in their materiality, we can preserve them in historical context. We have to do this. We have to be, because otherwise, how do you teach your children that you, at one time, you did something? At one time, you were the leaders in engineering. You built pyramids. At one time, you did this. Your people did this. How do you do this in an oppressive society that doesn't want you to express anything about where you came from? So you must honor your ancestors, even in your homes. You must have your shrines, and you must, respect and have this sense. I'm very sad about the Timbuktu thing, but some of the books were preserved, by the way. There was a big story about one person who hid many of the books, and the people who hid some of the books, you have to remember, these people were Muslim too. Because most of the people in Mali are Muslims, even the ones who were trying to save the books are Muslim, as well as the ones who are trying to destroy them. And in Nigeria, of course, you have the same philosophy, and that's why in the northern part of Nigeria, almost no traces of African art or culture. Wiped out, totally wiped out, after 400 or 500 years of Islam, basically, which tells you that the images are wrong. You shouldn't have any images, graven images of anything, and so on. So everybody else, the Greeks still have their sculpture from 200 BC, and our sculptures and all that stuff. They say we have no culture because we don't have any evidence of it, but it's all wiped out. And it's because, again, fanaticism and this whole notion that somehow you get to be pure by getting rid of the materiality that has been created by the genius of your ancestors. I reject that. Yes, in the back.
What are the primary designations between the terms Kemet and Nubia?
Well, between Kemet and Nubia, sometimes they flow right into each other. This is why, for example, the city of Aswan used to be called the one of the limits of Nubia to the north. But now some people are saying the limit of Nubia to the north could go all the way up to Kamombo in Egypt. So, which make Egypt much shorter, Kemet much shorter, you see. So I think they just flow across the border. Borders change. Of thousands of years, the borders have changed. And sometimes, it's Waset, for example. Waset is north of Aswan, and Waset was the chief capital, along with Napata, for the rulers of several dynasties. Yeah. Okay. One last question. Yes.
Actually, I have two.
Okay. Sure.
One was, and they're very quick, I think.
Sure.
One was, when was the dam built that flooded the area in
the Aswan High Dam was 1970. 1964. 1964.
And also, Moses,
Yes.
Sir,
Yes.
you were saying that he had so many battles.
Yes.
What was he battling?
He was battling mainly the Syrians, the Hittites, and he fought many battles, and also Nubia as well. He fought Nubia as well. So he fought. He extended the boundaries of Kemet deep into Asia, and also with Nubia. You're welcome. Okay, brothers and sisters, thank you.
Thank you all so much again. What's the next date? I want to make sure I announce it properly. Oh, that's me. I feel like that young sister.